Namaste, Dandavat Pranam. By the instruction and grace of our spiritual master, Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj, we are here reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Starting off the new year very auspiciously. Canto 3, the Status Quo, Chapter 28, Chapter 19. Stitam Vrajantam Asinam Sayanam Vaguhasyayam Prakshani Yehitam Dhyayech Chudha Bhavena Chetasa. Thus, always merged in devotional service, the yogi visualizes the Lord standing, moving, lying down, or sitting within him. For the pastimes of the Supreme Lord are always beautiful and attractive. The process of meditating on the form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead within oneself and the process of chanting the glories and pastimes of the Lord are the same. The only difference is that hearing and fixing the mind on the pastimes of the Lord is easier than visualizing the form of the Lord within one's heart, because as soon as one begins to think of the Lord, especially in this age, the mind becomes disturbed, and due to so much agitation, the process of seeing the Lord within the mind is interrupted. Where there is sound vibrated praising the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, however, one is forced to hear. That hearing process enters into the mind, and the practice of yoga is automatically performed. For example, even a child can hear and derive the benefit of meditating on the pastimes of the Lord simply by listening to a reading from Bhagavatam that describes the Lord as he is going to the pasturing ground from with his cows and friends. Hearing includes applying the mind. In this age of Kali Yuga, Lord Chaitanya has recommended that one should always engage in chanting and hearing Bhagavad Gita. The Lord also says that the Mahatmas, or great souls, always engage in the process of chanting the glories of the Lord, and just by hearing, others derive the same benefit. Yoga necessitates meditation on the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, whether he is standing, moving, lying down, etc. Text 20. Tasmil labda padam chitam sarvavayava samstitam vilakshai tatra samyujad ange bhagavato muni. In fixing his mind on the eternal form of the Lord, the yogi should not take a collective view of all his limbs, but should have the mind on each individual limb of the Lord. The word muni, purport. The word muni is very significant. Muni means one who is very expert in mental speculation or in thinking, feeling, and willing. He is not mentioned here as a devotee or yogi. Those who try to meditate on the form of the Lord are called munis, or less intelligent, whereas those who render actual service to the Lord are called bhakti yogis. The thought process described below is for the education of the muni. In order to convince the yogi that the absolute truth or Supreme Personality of Godhead is never impersonal at any time, the following verses prescribe observing the Lord in his personal form, limb after limb. To think of the Lord as a whole may sometimes be impersonal. Therefore, it is recommended here that one first think of his lotus feet, then his ankles, then the thighs, and the waist, then the chest, then the neck, then the face, and so on. One should begin from the lotus feet and gradually rise up limbs, and gradually rise to the upper limbs of the transcendental body of the Lord. Text 21. Sanchidtayed Bhagavatas Sanchintayed Bhagavatas Charnaravindam Yadran Kusadbhajas Saruruha Lochanadyam Utungarakta Vilasan Nakachakrabal Jyotsnabir Ahat Mahad Dridhayandrakaram. The devotee should first concentrate his mind on the Lord's lotus feet. The devotee should first concentrate his mind on the Lord's lotus feet, which are adorned with the marks of a thunderbolt, a goad, a banner, and a lotus. The splendor of their beautiful ruby nails resembles the orb of the moon and dispels the thick gloom of one's heart. Purport. The Mayavadi says that because one is unable to fix his mind on the impersonal existence of the absolute truth, one can imagine any form he likes and fix his mind on that imaginary form. But such a process is not recommended here. Imagination is always imagination and results only in further imagination. A concrete description of the eternal form of the Lord is given here. The Lord's soul, S-O-L-E, is depicted with distinctive lines resembling a thunderbolt, a flag, a lotus flower, and a goad. The luster of his toenails, which are brilliantly prominent, resembles the light of the moon. If a yogi looks upon the marks of the Lord's soul, S-O-L-E, and on the blazing brilliance of his nails, then he can become freed from darkness of ignorance in material existence. This liberation is not achieved by mental speculation, but by seeing the light emanating from the lustrous toenails of the Lord. In other words, one has to fix his mind first on the lotus feet of the Lord if he wants to be freed from the darkness of ignorance and material existence. Text 22. Yachchocha nihistrata sarit pravarodakena tirtena mordhyan yadi kritena shiva shivo bhut Dhyator mana samala saila nishrishta vajram Yayech chiram bhagavatas charanaravindam. The blessed Lord Shiva becomes all the more blessed by bearing on his head the holy waters of the Ganges, which has its source in the water that washed the lotus feet of the Lord. The Lord's feet act like thunderbolts hurled to shatter the mountain of sin stored in the mind of the meditating devotee. One should therefore meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time. Purport. In this verse, the position of Lord Shiva is specifically mentioned. The impersonalists suggest that the absolute truth has no form, and that one can therefore equally imagine the form of Vishnu or Lord Shiva or the goddess Durga or their son Ganesh. But actually, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the Supreme Master of everyone. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila 5.142, it is said, Ekale Ishvara Krishna Arashaba Brityaha. The Supreme Lord is Krishna, and everyone else, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, not to mention other demigods, is a servant of Krishna. The same principle is described here. Lord Shiva is important because he is holding on his head the holy Ganges water, which has its origin in the foot wash of Lord Vishnu. In the Hare Bhakti Vilas by Sanatana Goswami, it is said that anyone who puts the Supreme Lord and the demigods, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, on the same level, at once becomes a Pashandi, or an atheist. We should never consider the Supreme Lord Vishnu and the demigods on equal footing. Another significant point of this verse is that the mind of the conditioned soul, on account of its association with the material energy from time immemorial, contains heaps of dirt in the form of desires to lord it over material nature. This dirt is like a mountain, but a mountain can be shattered when hit by a thunderbolt. Meditating on the lotus feet of the Lord acts like a thunderbolt on the mountain of dirt in the mind of the yogi. If a yogi wants to shatter the mountain of dirt in his mind, he should concentrate on the lotus feet of the Lord and not imagine something void or impersonal. Because the dirt has accumulated like a solid mountain, one must meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for quite a long time. For one who is accustomed to thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord constantly, however, it is a different matter. The devotees are so fixed on the lotus feet of the Lord that they do not think of anything else. Those who practice the yoga system must meditate on the lotus feet of the Lord for a long time, following regulative principles and thereby controlling the senses. It is specifically mentioned here, Bhagavatas Charanara Vinda. One has to think of the lotus feet of the Lord. The Mayavadis imagine that one can think of the lotus feet of Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma, or Goddess Durga to achieve liberation, but this is not so. Dhanavad Pranam, Devi.
Hare Krishna, Dhanavad Pranam Maharaj. Prabhuji.
Happy New Year.
Yes, Prabhuji. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Bhagavata is specifically mentioned. Bhagavata means of the Supreme Person.
Which sloka? Which number? What number sloka?
It is Canto 3, chapter 28, text 22.
22.
Okay, so Bhagavata is specifically mentioned. Bhagavata means of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, and no one else. Another significant phrase in this verse is Shiva Shivo Bhut. By this constitutional position, Lord Shiva is always great and auspicious. But since he has accepted on his head the Ganges water, which emanated from the lotus feet of the Lord, he has become even more auspicious and important. The stress is on the lotus feet of the Lord. A relationship with the lotus feet of the Lord can even enhance the importance of Lord Shiva, what to speak of other ordinary living entities. Text 23. Janodvayam chalaja lochanaya jananya lakshmya kilasya sura vanditaya vidhatu Varvornidhaya kara palavarochi sayat samlalitam hrdi vibor abhavasya kuryat. The yogi should fix in his heart the activities of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, who is worshipped by all demigods and is the mother of the Supreme Person, Brahma. She can always be found massaging the legs and thighs of the Transcendental Lord very carefully, serving him in this way. Purport. Brahma is the appointed Lord of the universe. Because his father is Garbhodaksha Vishnu, Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, automatically is his mother. Lakshmi Ji is worshipped by all demigods and by the inhabitants of other planets as well. Human beings are also eager to receive her favor as the goddess of fortune. Lakshmi is always engaged in massaging the legs and thighs of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayan, who is lying on the ocean of Garbha within the universe. Brahma is described here as the son of the goddess of fortune, but actually he was not born of her womb. Brahma takes his birth from the abdomen of the Lord himself. A lotus flower grows from the abdomen of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, and Brahma is born there. Therefore, Lakshmi Ji's massaging the thigh of the Lord should not be taken as the behavior of an ordinary wife. The Lord is transcendental to the behavior of the ordinary male and female. The word Bhavasya is very significant, for it indicates that he could produce Brahma without the assistance of the goddess of fortune. Since transcendental behavior is different from mundane behavior, it should not be taken that the Lord receives service from his wife just as a demigod or human being might receive service from his wife. It is advised here that the yogi always keeps this picture in his heart. A devotee always thinks of this relationship between Lakshmi and Narayan. Therefore, he does not meditate on the mental plane as impersonalists and Buddhists do. Bhava means one who accepts a material body, and abhava means one who does not accept the material body, but descends in the original spiritual body. Lord Narayan is not born of anything material. Matter is generated from matter, but he is not born of matter. Brahma is born of the creation. But since the Lord existed before the creation, the Lord has no material body. Text 24. Uru Suparna Pujayor Adhi Sobha Manav Ojo Nidhi Atasika Kusumav Abasu Yalambi Pitta Bharavasasi Vartamana Kanchi Kalapa Parirambi Niktamba Bimbam. Next, the yogi should fix his mind in meditation on the personality of Godhead's thighs, the storehouse of all energy. The Lord's thighs are whitish blue, like the luster of a linseed flower, and appear most graceful when the Lord is carried on the shoulders of Garuda. Also, the yogi should contemplate his rounded hips, which are encircled by a girdle that rests on the exquisite yellow silk cloth that extends down to his ankles. Purport. The personality of Godhead is the reservoir of all strength, and his strength rests on the thighs of his transcendental body. His whole body is full of opulences, all riches, all strength, all fame, all beauty, all knowledge, and all renunciation. The yogi is advised to meditate upon the transcendental form of the Lord, beginning from the soles of the feet, and then gradually rising to the knees, to the thighs, and finally arriving at the face. The system of meditating on the Supreme Personality of Godhead begins from his feet. The description of the transcendental form of the Lord is exactly represented in the Archa Vigraha, the statue in the temples. And generally, the lower part of the body of the statue of the Lord is covered with yellow silk. That is the Vaikuntha dress, or the dress the Lord wears in the spiritual sky. This cloth extends down to the Lord's ankles. Thus, since the yogi has so many transcendental objectives on which to meditate, there's no reason for his meditating on something imaginary, as the practice of the so-called yoga, whose objective is impersonal. And thus ends our reading for today. We'll continue from text 25 on Wednesday. Jai Vishnupad Paramahamsa Sripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Gurudev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Our glories to the
Jai.
several devotees. Our glories to the worldwide devotees. Sama Bhaktivedanta Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai. Nashangapali Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Ju Ki Jai. Ganga Mai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Gir Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai.
Jai.
Jai Tulsi Devi Bhakti Devi Vrinda Devi Ki Jai.
Jai.
Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.
Jai.
Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai. Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi Hari
Hari Hari Bol.
Jai Shrimati Uma Devi Dasi Ki Jai.
Jai Gurudev. Sripad Krishna Keshav Prabhu Ji Ki Jai.
Bol. Have a wonderful day, Didi.
Thanks, Prabhuji. Happy New Year again, and Maharajas.
Yes, I'll tell him. My Dhanavats to you.
Dhanavats.